the closer you got to the individual game, typically the less senior you needed to be because you didn't have the scope. If you're the CTO, you need to be able to understand what is your role in terms of the people, the product, and the process, but all underpinned by hopefully your superior understanding of technology. Understanding I'm not spending enough time looking forward. The house is on fire and I'm, front man with the fire hose putting the fire out. I shouldn't be that person. I should make sure there's somebody else who's been trained to be able to do that. Then I should be thinking about what are the tools, the processes, the procedures to make sure the house doesn't catch on fire next time. If the CTO says, oh, it's really fast, like you're full of shit. If you can change Amazon, that feels like a pretty major accomplishment. And in 2 years, I did. We have to think like the customer. Stop thinking like a web designer and your web pages. And it's like, you can't just load a web page with hundreds or thousands of products listed. The network will choke.
So what did you find more difficult to scale? Like technology, people, or the decision-making processes? Right. Dorion, good to see you. Welcome to Life on Mars.
Thank you. I'm really glad to be back. It's good to see you, Alex.
It's this conversation actually, you provided a very, very good conversation around the topic of finding a CTO, not so much about becoming a CTO. The first time we met in 2017, you were traveling around Europe. And we hosted a Start Brand event, which at the time, they were totally not technical. But, not every day you get the CTO/CIO of Zynga. And I said, let's take on the chance. And we had a conversation about how to find technical co-founders and how to find CTOs. Do you remember that conversation, how it went?
I sure do, yeah. And it was actually really interesting because there were a lot of very successful and inspirational product people, financial people, operational people. There were some technologists in the audience, but they were really hungry to learn more about how do I find that great tech person who's going to help me bring my vision to reality.
And and actually we did it at a very special place because we did a coding bootcamp called IronHack, which at the time they were really good friends of ours until they stopped teaching Ruby on Rails. But that's another story. Jokes aside, I think we also got like some extra tech talent to attend that event because usually we didn't get technical people to come to the event. We got more like founders and CEOs and stuff like that at Startup Grind. But I remembered from that conversation, the amount of it's very hard to talk about technology without going into technical detail, but the way you explain things made me think that he has to be a very good CTO because he's able to convey the ideas, the technicalities with plain language, accessible to business people, which I guess it's one of the most difficult traits you have to acquire when you want to become a CTO. Is like, how the fuck do I explain this thing about technical depth or Terraform to the CEO, right? Or the board. Right. When do you acquire that?
Especially when it's very expensive. They don't want to spend money. So I've learned a lot and like most of my career, I started in tech in 1986. So going a while back, actually really from the very beginning, everything I've done has been driven by and through data. And what I found that in talking to the CCs or talking to other leaders or people you need to be able to convince, when you have data on your side, it makes it a lot easier. You have to be able to tell the story. You have to be able to help them understand the relevance of that data. And as I just think forward over, 30 plus years of working with teams, with leadership, with data and systems and all of those things, and then I look forward for the next 30 years with AI, it's still all data. And so for me, that through line is a really strong grounding point. Data isn't necessarily the thing that will ground every technical person and will create the road for them. But I found in all the different industries that I've worked in, the closer I got to the data, the closer I got to the truth, the closer I got to being able to influence the organization, not just in terms of getting people to do what I think is right, but actually understanding what is going to be right. And then you have all of the aspects of scaling data, staging data, purging data, figuring out the costs associated with it and how to process it and turn the data into information and sort of create even more value as you move up the chain. And I think as compute and data set sizes have gotten bigger and more powerful, we can look and examine it so much more. But at the same time, you can make mistakes so much faster, and those mistakes can be horrendously costly.
I'm not going to talk about the technical fuck up you shared 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I'm going to leave people with the burning desire to find out. I'm going to forward people. I'm going to lead people to the episode we recorded back then. But I guess there's a lot of enduring because to my understanding of this is, the CEO is the ultimate decision maker of a company. The CEO reports to the board, even though like a CTO might report to the board as well. I'd say the ultimate decision maker of the company is the CEO, and the board, having more financial and business backgrounds, they might have a harder time understanding the technicalities of some of the things that the CTO wants to do in the company, right? Oh, maybe we need a refactor. Maybe we need to increase the size of the tech team. Maybe we want to change this technology. Maybe we want to break down the monolith and stuff like that, right? And it appears to be that most of the times when these conversations happen, like it's very hard for these arguments to become first-class citizens, right? It's always like fundraising, hiring or firing, changing the leadership or product strategy and stuff like that. And the technical stuff is like second division. How have you personally endured these conversations, this amount of rejection all over the years?
I'll get to that specifically, but I think it's important to add a little bit of additional context, particularly if we're thinking about, the road to CTO, because it ultimately depends on the stage of the business. It could be a startup where the CTO is the most technical person, is perhaps the technical co-founder and the one with the vision. Stage could also be a very mature business is looking at radical transformation, and they need somebody who can think outside of what they've been doing because they're looking to transform that business. The other is scale. The scale could just be you're going from 3 people to 30 people, and there are actually several points of change in that where it can be the technology itself, but it may also be the process and procedure. 3 tech guys sitting around a table coding and sharing code is very, very different than a team of 15 engineers and a couple of product managers and a CEO. And this, if you're the CTO, you need to be able to understand what is your role in terms of the people, the product, and the process, but all underpinned by hopefully your superior understanding of technology. And being able to do all of those pieces together can help you navigate the situations you're talking about. But, I have one very specific example that comes to mind where at Zynga, we had, moved into the AWS cloud. There's several stories out there already about that. We were able to grow some of our largest games because of what the cloud provided, but we encountered several limitations with AWS at the time. And the CEO with the then CTO decided to bring all of that cloud computing back in-house. And so we rented data centers, we built out infrastructure, we created our own virtual cloud. The theory was we'd be able to burst loads from our private cloud up into the AWS cloud if we needed. That theory never came to practice. It was actually a pretty foolish idea in the first place. I don't think anybody's really getting to that sort of full fluid cross cloud computing, distributed computing and expansion contraction. But, there are other ways around that. And we got to a place where, the business had turned sour. The old CTO had left. I had moved into the role of the CIO and was responsible for all of this infrastructure, all of the cost, all of the personnel responsible for running it all. And the CEO at that point and the CFO were saying, okay, how do we build out our data centers? How do we continue to drive better efficiencies while also ensuring that we have the future capacity we're going to need for our future successes? And, when I really looked into it all, what I figured out working with my team was that we should not be in the data center business. We should not be in the cloud business. We're a game company. We should be focusing all of our critical resources and our best and brightest minds on creating better games and better game architectures. And so I had to go in and showed them in terms of the 4 years of 12 and a half megawatts of data centers that we had purchased on both coasts of the United States, uh, in order to replace all of that depreciated and now failing hardware, we would probably need $100 million of capital. Well, that was a number. So use the data. That scared them. And I said, we
Yeah.
spent 150 million last time. So I'm actually telling you we can spend less this time, but it's still a giant number. And oh, by the way, you're saying we need to think about compressing our teams, shrinking our teams. The 100 people I'll need to be able to find that hardware, test that hardware, build that hardware out, build that infrastructure out, they don't work for us right now. So I have to hire 100 people. Like, that's a number. I could back it up. What are the skills? What do they have to do? When would they need to come on? When would they roll off? And I created a very credible story to say, we need to go back to AWS. They're the experts in cloud computing. We're not. They have the expertise in exactly what distributed computing platform we should be working on, what underlying storage systems we should be thinking about, how we should optimize this kind of a workload versus this other kind of workload. They'll work with us. Our engineers can be focused on that next layer of value in terms of what's directly going to benefit the customer. We're not moving machines and networks and cables and physical things around. That's not our core competency. And so being able to tell that story back with the numbers helped them understand this makes a lot more sense. And again, it just sort of came back to what is our core mission as a business, as a product? What are we doing for our customers? And building data centers isn't it? Like AWS, that's what they do for a business. That's great. Let them do it. And we could have gone with Google. We could have gone to Azure. We could have gone different places. We were very familiar with AWS, so that just worked for us.
It's great. But I think this sort of conversation is gut level CTO stuff. I think that most of the people who are listening to this podcast will never have this conversation, or maybe if they're able to become a very successful CTO slash CIO, like in your case, take me back to the beginnings, right? Because I'm very much intrigued about the first time you heard the word or the acronym CTO. And were you inspired by it? Did you want to become one, or you thought like, oh, I'm never gonna be CTO. I don't want to be CTO. I just want to keep coding and doing, like, I don't know, getting my hands dirty.
Yeah, well, I've a little bit of a precursor to that, but it just directly in answer to that, it was probably I started out as a marketing analyst and office manager for a 3-person investment management firm in San Francisco. I was there for a year and a half. I then went to a mutual fund company. Although we had technology and we had databases and lots of things to process what the investments were and who the prospects or customers were, it was much more about the financial services side. It wasn't. So there were no CTOs. I went to Oracle from there. Oracle may have had a CTO, but it's even then in the early 90s, CTO wasn't a title that people threw around a lot. I don't think
Okay.
Larry wanted the leather C's. It's like he was the
Dope.
only chief.
He was
Um,
the only C.
yeah. And then, from there I went to Electronic Arts, which was much more of a studio oriented company. Each different game team had their own technology product. They approached it depending on, what kind of a game it was, what platform it was. But again, not really a CTO. And then at I went from there to Excite, which was the search engine and web portal. And there, interestingly, because they'd acquired a few companies, they had more than one CTO, depending on which part of the business.
For divisions, for products?
Well, I mean, so the Excite search engine had their uh, co-founder and lead technologist, who was the CTO of that. They had acquired another search engine web crawler who had a CTO who was incredibly competent and good at what he did, really a brilliant technologist. And then there was a third acquisition and yet another CTO. They worked it out where only one of them really had the title, but each of them in their own right really stood at the top of the technology team. They understood the current infrastructure, the current technical architecture, the current workloads. And what really distinguished them and made me think, hey, these guys think differently is their ability to look forward and decide it's not what's next, it's what's way after that. Are we even positioned to be able to get there? And then fast forwarding, a few more jobs at Zynga, again, a game company, studio oriented. We had five major games. Each of them had a CTO. That was the first time where I got the title of CTO, but in one of these game studios. And we were growing very, very quickly. And one of the things that, as the five CTOs, we would meet on a weekly basis and discuss what was working, what wasn't working, what were the three greatest challenges we'd had to solve that week, share that expertise, and then split up, run away, and go do our own thing again. Was this shared sense that for us to be incredibly successful, we need to be making ourselves obsolete in our current role as fast as possible. So anytime you're doing something, figure out a way to make it so nobody ever has to do that again, that a junior person can write a tool so nobody has to do it again. A more senior person can write a tool so nobody has to do it again, or a junior person has to manage it, or a senior person has to manage it. But try to work those core problems out to the extent that you can create the process, create the procedure, create the practice, create the mechanisms to make those things that broke not break anymore and just become easy, then you can actually start thinking about the harder problems. And so there's this really interesting tension and dynamic in being a CTO is recognizing the problems you have and helping people understand how to make those go away while understanding, thinking about, and anticipating the problems you may have in the future and doing everything you possibly can to prevent them from happening. And when they happen, do the deep dive, do the post-mortem analysis, build the practices, the processes, the procedures, the mechanism, so that whatever just went wrong doesn't go wrong again the next time. And they're a very concrete example and a little bit of the bittersweet of doing things, at least in the way I think was the right way. We were launching games pretty frequently. Every 2 to 3 months we were launching a new game. And most of the games shared a relatively similar architecture, but each game, the game teams themselves, either the game was different or they just thought, no, we're going to do it different. We're going to have better technology than the last team. And invariably in the initial days, well, hours, days, and weeks of a launch, if a game is successful, it starts to scale rapidly. And as those workloads really ramp up, you start to find all of the mistakes that have been made, whether they are the new mistakes because you change technology, you change a version of something, you change how you implement something, or you didn't pay attention to the last team. And so my simple thing was just like, okay, every time we launch a game, anything that breaks, we're going to put it in a spreadsheet checklist and share it. And then we're going to document the solution that had we done this, this would have prevented it from happening. And, it started out as a couple of items. And then, make sure you warm your caches before you open up everything to the thundering herd of customers that are trying to come in. Any of those sorts of classic mistakes that people make, but helping those teams avoid all of those mistakes so you can avoid the 3 a.m. emergency calls and emergency code pushes and all those sorts of things that really burn people out, but also help them focus on the things that truly matter. So leverage the recognition of the past, the things that worked, the things that broke, the things that made the things that broke not break again, and use that. And I think by about the 15th game, it was over 200 items, and we had a program management team and the the lesser CTOs. I hate to call them lesser CTOs, but these were the games that hadn't yet proven themselves.
We'll get into
And
that. Yeah.
yeah, they felt like this was just bureaucracy. You're just making me do all of these things, and it has nothing to do with my game. And they started to abandon the list, and then they would get the 3 a.m. calls, and things would break, and customers would be pissed off at them. And it's not like we knew everything. It's just we had created this body of knowledge that not only said, here are the things that will go wrong and wake you up in the middle of the night, here are the things to do before that so it doesn't happen. And it seems pretty common sense. What I was talking about before in terms of procedure, practice, process, mechanisms, I think what we failed to do is our mechanism was here's a spreadsheet. And what we should have done is turn that into code or turn that into templates or turn that into configuration as code. Ways that all you have to do is check out this repo, run this, build script, and the 30 things that could go wrong in all of these ways won't go wrong with you. And you can have a junior engineer do that. Again, that idea of either make it so nobody ever has to do it again or move it down the stack in terms of seniority as fast as possible.
You touched on something that is very interesting that we haven't covered in this podcast series before, which is the lesser CTOs. And I was going to go into that because when I was taking a look at your LinkedIn profile, and I remember from our conversation in 2017 that prior to becoming like one of the chief officers in Zynga, you had been the CTO of Mafia Wars, if I'm not mistaken. Yep. One of the I'm not into mobile gaming, so I know fuck all about this. Only Pokemon Go. That's the only thing.
Even before mobile gaming, so
exactly. That's actually Facebook gaming, right? Yeah, social gaming. But for me, it's very interesting because you have the idea of product level CTO, then you had a division level CTO, then you had a company wide CTO, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, when did you have the oh shit moment, I'm the CTO now? Because I don't think you can get that feeling in a product level. Maybe you had the CTO feeling of, or that feeling of, oh shit, I'm the CTO at your previous companies where you were VP engineering and you were managing, effectively speaking, perhaps larger teams than at Zynga at product teams. I don't know if I got the question through.
No, you did. And this brings up another point, which I think you alluded to at the very beginning. And, in terms of what I mentioned in terms of scale and stage within this particular game organization and the game hierarchy, from individual product to a game franchise, to a division, to the company at large, we obviously, the closer you got to the individual game, typically the less senior you needed to be because you didn't have the scope. You weren't looking at all these problems across an entire division or across the entire company. That said, you might actually have to be much more technically connected because you're down as close to the product as possible. Where the division CTO is looking across lots of things, they still might be incredibly talented, but typically they're going to be the ones who are more experienced and can recognize situations and issues or help prevent them where the others are actually implementing. And so you sort of have this mix of what percentage of your time as an individual contributor engineer are you spending coding? Are you spending on administrative tasks like meetings or planning or writing documents? And what amount of time are you spending looking forward? And, general rule of thumb, it's like 70% of your time is focused on coding, 20% is the admin stuff, not just meetings, but you've got to do some research, you've got to figure some things out, and then maybe 10% of your time I'm thinking about the future. For the CTO, depending on your scope, you might actually reverse that, where you're spending 70% of your time thinking about the future, 20% of your time with the administrative burden or the efficiencies. Hopefully you can get there. And then 10% actually with your hands dirty in the technology. And as you move up that stack, as from a product CTO to a franchise CTO to a division CTO to the company CTO, I think those percentages change. And these are general rules of thumb. It may be very, very different. In a startup with 15 people, if you're the CTO, you're probably doing a lot of coding. And so it's not a universal rule, but there really is a difference. And I think the thing that helped me was as I changed and developed in my road, understanding I'm not spending enough time looking forward. The house is on fire and I'm, front man with the fire hose, putting the fire out. I shouldn't be that person. I should make sure there's somebody else who's been trained to be able to do that. Then I should be thinking about what are the tools, the processes, the procedures to make sure the house doesn't catch on fire next time. And I need to start thinking about that, not necessarily while the house is burning, but once we've got that under control, and then really starting to think forward a lot more about Why did it catch on fire? What are the things that made that happen? What are the things that we can do that will prevent that from ever happening again? And it, it's it's how you spend your time thinking. And as a CTO, you might be close to the technology and the person who's expected to think about the future of that technology. You might be more in the VP of engineering role, as you were saying before, where you're actually thinking about the team, you're thinking about the skill set, you're thinking about the career paths and the progression of those skills. You might have to do both. And so at Zynga, that was the thing that was really interesting is when I was hired in, Mafia Wars was starting to grow rapidly. Unfortunately, it was, falling over every day because they just had too many users and they had a bunch of really smart 20-year-old engineers, but they'd never done this before. So they didn't know why it was on fire. They just knew it was on fire and they're all there with their fire hoses and their bucket brigades. Um, and at that time, there were, again, I said the five major games, Mafia Wars was one of them. And the feeling inside the company was the CTO has to be the most senior technical person on the team, and they spend all their time in the technology, understanding the technology, helping everybody else figure out the right way to do things with the technology. And like I said, in some cases that is right. They didn't have any CTOs at that point for their game studios who were also VPs of engineering. And after about 3 months, I moved from individual contributor to manage a team of about 15. We called them the systems pod. They were the guys that dealt with all the infrastructure, scaling the machines, configuring, upgrading software. They made sure that our infrastructure, because again, we were running everything ourselves at this point before moving to AWS. And that was a very technical team. That sort of operational excellence role was something I'd done before. So I was very familiar with it. But what I needed to do was, again, to recognize the things that these people were doing and what can I do to help them be the most effective they can be. And so, probably 6 months in, I ran the entire engineering organization while still being the senior most technical person on the team, helping them dive deep when they needed. But from falling over several times a day to some changes were put in place. We only fell over once a day. Then we only fell over once a week. Then only once a month. And after about 5 months, the game stopped crashing. And people kept, going into this like, well, why are you spending your time on all of this infrastructure? Why are you spending your time on all this process? Why are you doing like, we need our engineers coding. How many lines of code did they check in? It's like, you got it wrong. That is not what we want to do. We want them doing the most valuable work they can be doing. And part of it was I was the senior most person on the team, so they kind of had to listen to me, from a technical perspective. I had a good working relationship with our general manager, who was essentially the CEO of our game and making sure that they bought into those sorts of uh, decisions, which made them feel like we were slowing down. But in fact, we were laying the foundation and making sure that it was very solid so we could go really fast. Because if the game's falling over every week and whatever you were shipping this week ain't shipping this week because it's all hands on deck to put the fire out, you don't have any regularity. You can't actually promise senior management. You can't promise your customers we're going to get these features out because you don't know what's going to burn next.
Yeah, there's like in all of these, there's a couple of things I don't really understand, perhaps because I haven't been in the context of such large companies. And like, for instance, defining like these lesser CTOs from the point of view of the company, you're sort of empowering them to be the ultimate responsible for this area, this division, this franchise, or this product. But at the end of the day, if they don't do their job, there's going to be another CTO on top of them, right? So I know their job is on the line if the product doesn't perform well, if you don't solve these burning issues and whatnot, but you're not a CTO, effectively speaking. So I don't know if that really drives your salary up, drives your ego up, and what are you gaining as a company by enabling all of these lesser CTOs?
Yeah, that's a really good question. The one thing, I thought, Zynga had a ridiculous proliferation of the title CTO. It's like, you're the, you're the
I kind
CTO
of
of the
like
coffee
dilutes
maker,
the
or
word, right? Or the
yeah,
role. It just dilutes.
yeah,
It's like everybody's a CTO.
yeah, yeah. Well, and that was, Mark Pincus, the founder. One of his things is everybody's a CEO. His point was
All
whatever
right.
you
That's a
own,
Zynga thing.
you
Okay.
own. And so if everybody's a CEO and you're a technologist, well, then you're a CTO. Like, yeah, okay, but at the point we had 30 CTOs, that was kind of ridiculous. Again, there was a hierarchy. that idea of the lesser CTO, it was more like these are people who have developed enough of the necessary skills, proven themselves to own something of consequence outright. We had mentors and other ways that people could get help, request help. I met with probably five other game CTOs, sort of these lesser CTOs, typically once a week, sometimes every other week. Again, several, very easy questions. Tell me three things that went well this week. Tell me three things that went horribly and tell me what you did. And what are you going to do next week? Whether it's technology, whether it's people, whether it's process, whether it's pushing back on product because they're asking for too many features and you need to be able to figure out how to prioritize, building out some infrastructure, security or some stability or, whatever it might be. And just taking what I've been through and in some very simple questions, and they knew what the questions were, so they could come prepared if they wanted, and just help them from all the stupid mistakes that I've made. It's like, oh, when I did that, here's the terrible thing that happened. And all of a sudden they could see I can get ahead of where Dorian was at this stage in his career because he just gave me that secret. I don't have to do those dumb things. I can go past it. And so we had a technology organization that was very communicative. And I won't say that everybody was in support of everyone else and rah rah, but there was this aspect of, hey, we see this senior engineer who really is showing potential. He's got the ownership, he's got the technology skills, he needs some help. How about we put him on this little game in a CTO role and you act as his mentor and help grow them?
Hmm.
Again, that idea of making yourself obsolete every 6 months. It's like whatever you're doing now, you shouldn't be doing 6 months from now if we're going to grow. And we grew from 280 people when I started to 3,600 people 18 months later. So whatever I was doing when the company was 260 people, if I was still doing that, at 3,600 people, I was doing a really terrible job and I shouldn't be there anymore. So you have to look for other people and groom them. And then if you're on that road and you're that person, you got to look for the people that either have the knowledge or are willing to share it with you. If they're not
And on,
willing to
oh,
share it,
sorry.
then you got a problem. But
On the subject of mentorship, now that you bring it up, it seems like at Zynga, these like lesser CTOs were mentored by the immediately upper level CTO. But how about in previous companies? Was there any moment like you flipped the switch and you understood that you were becoming a great leader, not only a great engineer, and from there you started pursuing the CTO role, or did you have any sort of conversation with a mentor in previous companies? When did that happen? When did you have that moment of enlightenment?
so that was maybe 8 years before the Zynga times I'm talking about, maybe even a little bit, 10 years. Um, I was at a point where I'd been managing a team. I was running the technology team that ran the ad platform for Excite, the web portal and search engine. I probably had 12 or 15 engineers working for me. Uh, I had kind of made myself obsolete before that phrase had entered, my vernacular. But it was like I was looking around, going, "Well, what do I want to do next?" Because I've got a guy that I've trained up. He's fully capable of doing what I'm doing. It's not really that challenging for me. I think I can add more value at the company. How do I have that conversation with my manager, who was the VP of engineering? And I just said, I'm just going to have a conversation with him. He's here where I am. I'm at a crossroads. I see there's a lot of opportunity in the company, but I'm not actually sure what I want to do next or where I'm needed most. And he asked this really simple question, which I was just brilliant. He was a great leader and manager. He said, well, what do you like to do most? I said, well, I like to solve problems. That to me, that's what it's like. The why is the thing that really motivates me. The what and the how are interesting and you have to know how to do them, but the why did this break, or why can't we get this to scale, or why are we doing it this way? That was the really interesting part. And he said, okay, so if you really love solving problems, because I was struggling, there was one team that had five very senior engineers, and I love working with really smart, experienced senior engineers. Like the stuff that you can do is phenomenal, but it's very much of a startup environment. Uh, And personalities can get in the way too. But it's always incredibly rewarding to work in those small teams. And there was another product that was growing that I think was probably 30 to 50 engineers and other sort of technical support staff that had the opportunity to grow. And I said, I'm really attracted to this small team. I've done that before. It's so rewarding. Well, I haven't done this other thing. He said, well, if you think about it this way, how many hands do you have? I was like, yeah, I have two hands. Okay, got it. He said, well, if you've got a team of 50, how many hands do you have? Well, you got 100. Like, okay, how many problems do you think you can solve with two hands versus how many problems do you think you can solve with 100 hands? Like, aha, I can do a lot more with more
Good question.
people, but it's a totally different set of skills or things that I would have to exercise. While the underlying technology and thinking those things through would still be a requirement. And so I took that job. And that was sort of my first transition into, sort of a larger scale VP of engineering role. But then we were launching the Excite shopping channel, which required us to partner with a lot of content providers, whether it was, people had their merchandising in XML files or in JSON files or in some database or CSVs. And we had to figure out how do we scalably pull in updates to the product catalog, and how do we do that in a way that will adapt to each and every one of these things as we bring new merchants on, as those merchants change the way they represent their data structures. How do we normalize all that data? Again, it gets back to the data pieces, but there was an awful lot that needed to be thought through that was, if not programming per se, it certainly was about technical technique. How do you want to approach this? What layers of abstraction do you want to put in place? What kind of performance do you need? How quickly do you need to be able to process updates so that changes at some merchant site are reflected in our catalog? And so those sorts of things, but also you got to run a team of 30 engineers.
Actually, the road to CTO is very convoluted and it's very different for everybody. Like a lot of people come out of a corporate, like I interviewed an ex Google who just became CTO right after Google X. There are people who become the CTO by staying 30 years in the same company. And like one of my co-founders in his previous job, he joined the company as an intern and became the CTO 10 years later, right? So that's possible. Some CTOs are product people, some CTOs are more like information people, and some CTOs are cybersecurity people. There's a lot of CTOs. And I oftentimes make the joke that everybody can be a CTO if they shrink the company size enough, right? So you can be the CTO of yourself. You can be the CTO of a really small company if you don't have the expertise. But I seem to understand that prior to joining Zynga, when you were VP engineering and you had held that title at a couple of companies before that, you could have probably become a CTO, right? Like a global CTO, a company-wide CTO. Or do you think that going into Zynga and becoming a lesser CTO prepared you more to become a CTO than actually making the jump from VP engineering to big-time CTO?
I don't actually know the answer to that. I
Yeah.
took the
Is
job
it
at
related
Zynga.
to team size or to responsibilities? What is it related
I
to?
mean, as you were talking, a word popped into my mind, and I feel like it's probably a critical attribute of most successful people. But I think for technologists and people on the road to CTO, it's perhaps more true than for others. And that word's curiosity. Uh, you have to
All
have
right.
curiosity. You have to have curiosity about the technology, curiosity about, can this actually do it? Can this be done? What are things that nobody's ever done before? What are the things that everybody's done before but never been successful? Can you make that successful? I'm sure entrepreneurs have to have curiosity, lots of others. So it's not exclusive to the CTO, but I suspect there are not very many successful CTOs who aren't curious. And so,
You're right.
with
Yeah.
and maybe that's obvious. I don't know, but it is. When I think about that, I was curious about one, what Zynga was doing. They were being very successful. They were pre-IPO. It seemed like from a financial investment of my time perspective, it could pay off pretty well. It did. So that was ended up being a good call. Um, there were just aspects of what they were trying to do at the company that I thought were really interesting. In fact, because uh, they had multiple game studios, I didn't interview for the Mafia Wars position. I interviewed for being a game CTO at Zynga on one game, whether it was a game that they hadn't yet started, whether it was a game that was running, regardless. And in fact, I had the conversation with the company CTO who had recently been put into that position. He had formerly been the CTO of their largest, most profitable game, and he became the company CTO. He sort of said, well, you know, what resonated with you the most? Where do you think you want to go? And I said, well, where are there the biggest challenges and the biggest problems that, match some extent of my skill set? But again, the curiosity, but also, a desire to serve. And that was Mafia Wars. And it turned out, with the other four game CTOs at that time, I needed a mentor to ramp me up. And I happened to pick the guy who had been the former CTO of Mafia Wars. So it worked out very well. But some of that was just happenstance. It wasn't really part of a plan.
Well, let me circle back to something that you said that kind of like made me think. I had this sort of epiphany right now, so bear with me. I'm going to be making it up as I talk. So you mentioned that the CTO at the time at Zynga had previously been the CTO of the most successful game, which I understand it creates some sort of competition in companies where they have like this sort of CTO or CTO of sorts of multi-products. They are in a constant competition with each other because do they know that the most successful product CTO can eventually become the CTO of the firm, or that's just total bullshit and I just made it up? Like, did you actually think that was possible, or does it happen in other companies?
The thing that was interesting to me, going back to when I started on Mafia Wars, I was an individual contributor CTO. Then I had a team of a dozen. Then I had a team of 30. Then I ran all of their technical stuff because at the time they didn't believe that CTOs could both be the technical leader and the VP of engineering, the manager of the technology team. And yet, a couple of months before I started and got hired in as that individual contributor, they promoted the CTO of their most successful game into the CTO of the company, who not all the other CTOs reported into, but he did have a technology organization. But he very much is the senior most technical leader and running an organization, in defiance of their thing that CTOs don't do both. Like, okay, I'll put that aside for now, but I think you guys are ignoring the obvious here. It didn't specifically create competition. I think, one, we did have, over the course of about 2 years, we developed I think a pretty well-defined process and set of criteria to get promoted. What were the things that you needed to do? And, for most people, they were really just trying to get from senior engineer to being a game CTO, from game CTO to being a, studio CTO, and then maybe a franchise CTO, then a division CTO. And I don't think there were very many people who had aspiration to get to being the CTO. Really weird and somewhat embarrassing story, I think.
Let's go.
The CTO that we had, this who was moved into that role just before I started, about 4 or 5 years later, lots of things had happened. I moved through being the CTO of Mafia Wars to being the CTO of the shared technology group, to being the CTO of the mobile development division, and then from there actually became the CIO. And at some point, again, the business was struggling. Pincus decided to bring in a new CEO. And as part of bringing that new CEO in, he decided out with the old, in with the new. He was going to bring in people that he knew. So the CTO was out, the CFO was out, the chief people officer, head of HR was out, and I think the general counsel was out, but that was perhaps for other reasons. And I hadn't done anything bad yet. So I guess his view was whoever screwed all this stuff up, they all got to go. But it's totally unfair, but that was his view. He was kind of arrogant. And as I was, as the CTO was getting ready to exit, he prepped me. It's like, okay, the leadership team has met. We're going to be moving you into the role of CTO. The CIO organization will continue to report into you. We've got these other technical leaders we're going to put under you. And I said, wow, that's amazing. On the morning of the leadership team. This is the C-suite meeting where we're going to go over this and the rollout of all of it. We have a I have a meeting with the new CEO and one of these senior technical leaders, and he just tells me flat out, or tells us flat out, okay, you're going to be the CTO. You're just going to stay as the CEO, doing a great job like you're already doing. Like, oh, that's completely different than what I had just been told. But that's the old guard. You're the new guard. I can't really argue. But what was just the embarrassing part was walking into the C-suite boardroom with the giant projector, with the PowerPoint slide, with the org chart on it, with my name in the CTO box and this other guy's name reporting to me. I'm like, you couldn't even update the slide. That would just it. Yeah, I remember talking to the exiting CTO that evening, and he was like, "I had no idea that was going to happen. I would have given you a heads up. I really apologize. We work very well together. I have a tremendous amount of respect for him, so I have no reason to believe that he wasn't being completely genuine. But definitely that definitely created problems for me and the new CEO.
Oh, politics. Look, one of the traits of really smart people is that whenever they explain really complex problems, they they go on talking about like very large situations, and they make them sound very obvious, the solution of which they make them sound very obvious. And you do have that trait. So in hindsight, everything looks so easy because you've been talking about like, oh, reorg, scaling up, scaling down, moving off the cloud, going back in, stuff like that. The way you explain is like really fucking obvious. But people in their homes, they will be like, their brains will be exploding right now. So I'm pretty sure that at the time you faced difficulties and you didn't see it that obvious. And right now you have the benefit of time, right? So what did you find more difficult to scale? Like technology, people, or the decision-making processes?
uh,
Where did you
I
struggle the most? Seems like
well,
technology, maybe not, but
for me personally, I think it's the people part, and I had
okay.
to learn that. And again, going back to do I take the team of five or do I take the team of 30? I was like, hey, if it's only five people, I can probably deal with that. That's a lot easier. But I went to like, what's my uncomfortable zone? That's more people dealing with more people. So I had to learn those
Okay.
skills. And I can't say that I have innate technical talent, but I'm much more comfortable, in technology. I think the curiosity says if I don't know it, I can learn it and just try things. And I used to spend hours after the end of the workday, either reading O'Reilly books
Yeah.
or trying things out on a dev instance or whatever it would be. So I could like I just learned this thing. Let me see if I can make it happen. I learned by doing. So I mean, some of it's just recognizing your strengths, but not just playing to your strengths. And so for me, the harder part I think was people. I think whether it's people or product or the technology, one thing that at least for me seems to be incredibly important and kind of maybe a cheat code. And to me, there's sort of three pieces. There are patterns, anti-patterns, and what I'll call revisit patterns. And so patterns are things that you've done before that you've recognized and you can do them again. So, hey, I had a three-tiered architecture that had this backend data store. I understand the pattern of a three-tier architecture, where the scaling is, what the networking needs to look like. I'm going to swap out this storage backend, but the pattern of the three-tier architecture remains the same. uh, I'm going to go from client server to a three-tier architecture. Well, client server is just a two-tier. The pattern of client server, here's that. I'm going to go to distributed computing. Like, okay, well, I've got a three-tier architecture that now has another dimension where I have to be able to distribute things, but I can recognize these things. Anti-patterns, like, well, when you do these sorts of things, you're creating a single point of failure, you're creating a scaling bottleneck. What are the things that you can recognize that when done, things blow up? Kind of going back to that checklist concept again. It's like, what are the anti-patterns? To me, one of the most interesting things is the revisit patterns, which is things that didn't work in the past under the technology constraints that existed. Don't discard them now. It might actually make sense. that the IO throughput of an Oracle database from 5 years ago may not work for this workload back 5 years ago. But now you've got much faster storage subsystems, and the abstraction layer of the database technology is not the bottleneck. It turns out the bottleneck was always the storage subsystem at the hardware level. And so revisiting patterns that you might otherwise discard because, oh, everybody knows that's not going to work. Um, so that to me is really fun. I have one story on that. I started the first Oracle database I worked on was version 5.14, and going back, I think it's 1987. Um,
The year I
it,
was born, by the way.
yeah,
So
I
just to
was geeking
time
out on
things, I'm
I was
not.
geeking out on Oracle databases. So their 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 technical architecture for data consistency was what they called a before image file and an after image file. The before image had exactly what you thought. Before I made this change to the data, this is what the data looked like. The after image file said, after I made the change to the data, this is what it looked like. And then there was this concept of a checkpoint where when the system issues a checkpoint, it merges the after image on top of the before image. And now that becomes the new before image. And the next change will become the after image next checkpoint. And you can stack these things up. So if the system crashes, well, you've got a before image, a starting point, and then you've got several after image changes. You didn't reach a checkpoint, so they weren't committed. So you roll all of those back and you come to here, kind of like versioning software. This and
Yep.
so that's how they did that. But in order to manage the storage component of that, it was essentially the snake eating its tail. So you would allocate files that would go around and around and around, and at some point it would say, "Okay, I hope you've saved all of the changes from this file because I'm going to start writing over it again." The before image. Because if you didn't save it, you're screwed because you no longer have a starting point for your database. So, but you want to make sure you've got enough storage and enough of these things that as you go round robin, you're never going to come close to that. And as a DBA, you freak out when you set up alerts and alarms and figure all those things out. Fast forward 13, 14 years, we had a large database, happened to be Oracle, but that's not pertinent to the story, that was managing email pointers to email bodies on disk that were related to spam. This was Postini, which was anti-spam, antivirus. And so we just had this large database of pointers that said, okay, the email message body is stored over here on this hard drive. Uh, that was fine. As we purged data, we would delete these individual records, these individual pointers from the Oracle database. Well, at scale, as things really started to grow, the deletes couldn't go fast enough. And we needed a new architecture. And I went, well, why don't I revisit a pattern that I've seen before? And I know that the Oracle truncate operation is a single once and done. It just releases a bunch of allocated blocks, and whatever data is there, you can't get to it again. So instead of deleting individual records that have to have a full commit cycle so you can roll each one back, truncate, I'm just going to throw those out. So we saved 15 days worth of data in our spam archive. I created 30 individual tables as each of the buckets. And then as data was coming in, the pointers would be written to whatever was the current bucket for that day, which meant I had 15 days where I had pointers stored that I didn't need because they were already obsolete based on our product promise of only preserving 15 days. But it gave me 15 days in case something screwed up.
Yes.
And every night I would just truncate the table that was 30 days old. Single operation, boom. I don't care how many records are in that table. I don't have to worry about rolling anything back. You can't roll back a truncate. It's a data definition language command
Yeah.
as opposed to data manipulation. And that just, all of those performance problems went away. And so that the pattern recognition becomes really important, at least from my perspective. And so everything I learned about, you know, horizontally scaling Linux boxes was like, oh, I get distributed compute in the cloud. They're just virtual. There's no difference. Everything I learned about and the mistakes I made with, you know, uh, configuration as code, like that applies to everything you do. And, abstraction layers, how can you pull things out? When have you put too many abstraction layers in? Those patterns become really, really important. And I imagine there are cases where successful patterns actually become anti-patterns. So the one that I can think of is we used to feel really, really great when we were running our system on the largest hardware available at the time. Aren't we amazing? This was before a lot of distributed computing. Well, it turns out in retrospect, if you're running on the absolute largest hardware available at the time, you're screwed because you can't get any bigger. It's like, so what seemed like running everything on some beast of a machine was the best thing you could do, and that was the pattern, clearly became an anti-pattern.
Well, actually, I mean, and probably you've got also like the time vector. It's like after so many years, there's technology adoption cycles, bubbles, and stuff like that, passing fads. And you probably didn't believe in NFTs, but I don't know about that, or like blockchain, because it's still like I actually been working from technology for long enough to know that this is just a passing fad. But let me just for the last 10 minutes, I've got a couple of questions like at a level of a CTO that most people that they will even be the guest on this show, they probably have never experienced, right? One of them is one thing you mentioned very briefly, but just in passing, but I think it's really important. It's like you become the CTO quite unexpectedly at a big company and you have to face the board, right? You didn't have time to prepare for that. I guess that I know when you're going up the technical ladder, you know what the expectations for the next level are. And like, oh, I need to learn about this. I need to manage a larger team. I need to be able to manage multi-product, or I need to like kind of like solve this super complex technical issue or help the company to save money on whatever we're spending so that, I can check tick all the boxes and be able to make it to the next level. But how do you prepare to be the CTO when you don't know that you can become the CTO? And what are the things that you wish you had known of board dynamics, right? That you didn't have for first time board
Yeah,
joiners,
and
so to speak.
this may be specific to my personality. You might call it a personality trait. You might call it a personality flaw, depending on your perspective. But I'm not really big on lying or making shit up. So going back to that aspect of data, and if you have the
You
data,
wouldn't be a good CEO then,
probably
or
not.
CMO.
Uh, um, but telling the truth, and I've found that often the best way to earn people's respect, even if they hate what you're saying, is tell them the hard truths back with data. So for me, I love numbers. They just float around in my head all the time. I love, connections in data. That becomes really important to me. But I also realize that for board members, and the C-suite, they're for each of their areas, they're thinking about what are the numbers that worry them the most? What are the hard truths that worry them the most? From a technology perspective, from a technology organization perspective, from how your organization delivers value to these other leaders, like what is it that worries them the most? And what's the hard truth you can tell them, hopefully backed by data, where you can be their ally. You can help them. Make yourself useful. And it sort of goes back to, when I started at Zynga, it's like, well, where can I be of the most value? Again, that's not necessarily for everybody. That's my personality. I want to try to figure out that. And I've found that when I do that, I get elevated faster because people are like, oh, this guy tells us how it is, tells us things we don't want to hear sometimes. He's usually right because he's got the data on his side. When he's not right, he admits it and goes forward again. Like if I want somebody I can just trust and know is doing everything they think they can, I can just use this person. If I need somebody who can lie through their teeth and nobody knows it, he's absolutely the worst. I don't want him. So it kind of depends on what you're trying to do. And again, in startups, that I've worked with people who were CTOs who were just flat out liars. And often in technical due diligence, when we're looking at potential acquisitions, if I'm asking somebody, oh, so you've got this architecture, you're doing these things, I was like, how fast is it? If the CTO says, oh, it's really fast, like you're full of shit. If I say, okay, so what is really fast? How do you measure that? Oh, well, this transaction can take, a second or two. Like, which is it? That's materially different at hundreds or thousands of transactions per second, 1 second or 2 seconds. It's like, when we were doing things at Postini, we knew each little plugin in our process. We had 7 different plugins, how many milliseconds those things took per number of bytes being processed. And I had all that data on top of my head. So when people were doing diligence on us, I was like, oh, well, this plugin, we haven't been able to get down under 7 milliseconds. It actually jumps to about 13 milliseconds when we throw in this size of a file. But the vast majority of files, vast majority being about 80% or more, are all under that size. So we can predict how fast that chunk is going to go. Like that starts, okay, that's credible. He's got the data, but he's admitted, oh, it doesn't always work that way. And he's admitted 7 milliseconds isn't good enough, but that's the best we got right now. Like those to me are super important. That made me feel as a person, I'm on top of things. I think it earns respect with other people. And so the closer you can get to the thing that makes you you, for me, as I said, it's data and being truthful. But what is it for you? It may not be that. It might be I've examined these 17 new technologies. I've played with all of them, and this is what I'm seeing. And you might just be the a technology noodler, and that's incredibly valuable too.
And how about the moment, like the other thing that I think is pretty unique to your role and to your career is that after, having a C-level job, you move on to Amazon, then you become VP, right? So you're no longer a C-level. Um, I don't know if probably because you made it with Zynga, right? But I don't know what other things did you have to leave on the table or you had to let go, right? Now I was used to doing this. I was used to this dynamics. I was used to having this sort of information available to me or this budget or whatever. Now I'm just the VP at Amazon. Excuse me. It's just like crying in a fucking Porsche, right?
Yeah.
But you're not you're not the CTO anymore. So how did you manage this situation emotionally? Like I know it was
Yeah.
probably like a good match because you stayed there for years, but
Yeah.
you're not the CTO anymore.
Yeah. Interestingly, if I liken, Amazon and their product organizations that roll up into larger divisions, it's actually similar in structure to Zynga, where Zynga throws CTO titles all over the place. Amazon
Yeah.
doesn't throw titles all over the place, but when I started, there were 40 technical VPs across all of Amazon.
Oh,
Corporate Amazon,
geez.
when I started, was about 120,000 people. All of Amazon
Yeah.
was probably 1.2 million, but it's warehouse workers and distribution center workers and that. So if you're looking at the corporate part, it was about 120,000 people. I was one of 40 of the senior most technical people. So 120,000 people, 12,000 people. Now I'm one of four. If you get down to an organization of 4,000 people, I'm I'm the technology leader for an influence of about 4,000 people, just rough numbers. Zynga never got to 4,000 people. So I may have been the CIO, but I was
Yeah.
actually more valuable with more potential impact and scope at Amazon, not to mention the fact that Amazon can and does things and did things that Zynga never was going to. So it was actually a much bigger role. And then very specifically, and this is also kind of weird, but maybe it's fair to disclose. Um, when I was at Zynga, I was the CTO of the mobile division. A lot of it because I understood technology, I understood these patterns. Uh, I had never written a line of mobile code. I've still never written a line of mobile code. I understand architecture. I understand bottlenecks. I understand networking. I understand backing stores. I understand local caches. I understand all of these other patterns. And you're just squeezing it into a different network architecture and client server architecture. So, going back 30 years earlier, yeah, everything I did in client server, that's mobile. Now, I didn't need to be a smart yeah, I didn't need to be better at Swift or C Sharp or any of these things that were being used in the client. That didn't matter. At Amazon, I was the VP of the mobile division, and again, I didn't need to be the senior most mobile coding expert. I needed to understand what were the overall problems, and the biggest problem was how do we ship an updated app binary every 2 weeks with 50 to 100 other contributing Amazon teams who don't work for me because I'm responsible for the core mobile technology and shipping the app binary and creating tools and techniques and practices so all of these non-mobile developers around Amazon can actually create compelling mobile experiences that respect the network, that respect the device, that respect frame rates, that do all these things that you have to understand matter in mobile. But I didn't need to know how to write the code to do that. And so for me, Amazon, when I started, was not a mobile first company. 2 years prior, Jeff had stood up in front of a company meeting and said, we're mobile first. And that just meant, I think mobile really matters. And I'm going to say these words, but none of their actions followed suit. And I knew that mobile was the future. People were like, well, but people don't shop on mobile. They do their research and then they switch to their desktop. Like that's some subset of the US market, but that is not the global, that's not the world. Like most people in the rest of the world don't have a desktop computer and a mobile device. They're like, you guys
Yeah.
are not paying attention. So again, using data, showing trends. I had a really brilliant, technically savvy, but marketing product lead who understood all of that data, all those things. So I was armed with all the data that I needed. And I had a chance, in my view, when I took the job was I wanted to change Amazon, which if you can change Amazon, that feels like a pretty major accomplishment. And in 2 years, I did in that role. I started out, everybody was talking about pages and clicks, and I would redline documents. It's like in mobile, there are no pages. In mobile, there are no clicks. It's screens and tabs. It's scrolling. You have to think like the customer. Stop thinking like a web designer and your web pages. And it's like you can't just load a web page with hundreds or thousands of products listed. The network will choke. So we had to think differently. And I felt it was really important to use different words. I get a little obsessed about words, but I thought that was really important. And I remember when I was leaving that role, one of the VPs who'd been one of the most ardent resistors to this change said, we've got to figure it out. We know what we're doing. I remember we were in a document review session. He comes up to me before the meeting. He's like, Dorian, I'm really sorry. I didn't get a chance to proofread the final version of the doc. There's one mention of web page and one mention of click. We're going to fix it before we send it out to everybody. And it was like, I did it. And it seems so dumb that that was my victory. But the victory was I actually made my position obsolete. That by doing the things that we did, the team did amazing work. We were able to stabilize the environment, create the practices, the procedures, the mechanisms such that that team of 200 technologists did not need a VP anymore. So then I had to go find another job.
What a great way to wrap up, like going full circle to what you said at the beginning. The signature question of the podcast is just like the most expensive fuck up. You already answered that, so I had to come up with something else for this time around. And usually podcasts are really terrible at like asking these kind of questions, and people or fireside chats they go into like, what is the advice you would give to other people? That's a fucking lazy question, right? But I think I get a twist to that one because you are one of the humblest persons I know. You're always feet on the ground. And CTOs tend to get a little bit like high-nosed when they go up the management ladder. They tend to build an ego. They tend to be like, they have these aspirations or like they tend to look at people over the shoulder. And I wanted to ask you specifically, what kept you so grounded, so humble when you scaled up the management ladder, and how could that help other people?
That's that's an interesting question. A lot of self-reflection required. I do want to say one thing though. I think I've met more humble CTOs than arrogant CTOs. So your characterization
Okay.
may be from a different different set of experiences. The CTO at Zynga, very humble, very capable, had the right to be arrogant, but wasn't. And other CTOs, the CTO at one of the CTOs at Excite, I was talking about, described himself as a Luddite. It's like, how can you be the
Yeah.
CTO and somebody who doesn't believe in technology? He was exaggerating, but he always wanted to look for the simplest solution. What is the least technologically sophisticated solution I can come up with? That's what we should do. And so that I thought was humble. It's not what grandiose thing can I imagine. And then in terms of your question, now I forgot what it was. Uh, well, I forgot it.
How do you keep your feet on the ground?
Oh, feet on the ground.
Like,
Um,
yeah.
I don't know. Maybe this is a weak answer, but kind of going back to, you know, being honest and truthful. If I don't believe it, I'm not going to tell somebody else something. If I question it, I'll let them know I'm questioning it. If I'm wrong, I am pretty quick to admit I'm wrong, but you better have good data to prove it. Because I'm not an easy pushover. And so, with that, I hope I earn respect. And with that, I build trust and confidence in me. And if I'm speaking on behalf of my team and I can create examples of what my team is doing, I can get people to trust and respect my team as well. It's so much more important for me for other people to trust and respect my team because their teams are going to be working with my teams. And if there's mutual respect, a lot more stuff is going to get done. And I'm not going to get called in to referee. These people trust and respect each other. When they disagree, they'll be truthful and honest and tell each other the hard truths. And hopefully they'll work it out. If they have to escalate, fine. If I have to be in every meeting because they can't get along, I'm doing a terrible job. And so for me, that idea of, trust, truth, respect becomes a really easy way because if I don't trust or respect you, then I don't really want to work with you. I might have to, but there are definitely multiple times in my career where I got to that place and I left. Like I don't want to work with people like this. And it sort of comes down to this core idea. If you're willing to violate your own principles, they never were your principles.
That's good parting thought. After Amazon, you retired. I don't know if that's the word. But now
I
your LinkedIn profile reads advisor and mentor. Funnily enough, now you've got a more serious profile picture than when you had back in the day when you were employed, and now you've got a really professional headshot. So how can people reach out to you for this kind of mentorship or advice, and what are the kind of people that you can help? Is this something specific that you're looking for in mentees?
I think, messaging through LinkedIn is probably the easiest. It's probably not a good idea for me to give people my email address, although it's not that hard to guess. But I'll leave that out there. But yeah, reaching out. I am very interesting. Maybe I'm a different form of technologist. I've spent a lot of time cooking and gardening. So completely different skills and different things, but I'm still looking for the patterns and the anti-patterns and revisiting patterns in cooking and gardening.
Good. Dorian, thank you very much. It's been a
Thank
real
you, Alex.
pleasure as always.
That's been wonderful.